Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we head into Canelake's Candies in Virginia to take a look at the Dayton figures they have given a second life to. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. In the kitchen of Canelake's Candies, fresh candy is prepared for eager customers.
Some kids. Come on in. Come on in. Hello. Welcome.
As customers enter, they are also greeted by several repurposed Dayton figures and animatronics in the windows. What customers don't see are more figures in the basement waiting to receive their second life.
Okay. This guy I really like. Where's his head?
I know.
His head is gone.
Joining me on this exploration into this family candy store and the figures they're housing is arts entertainment reporter Jay Gabler. Jay, welcome back.
Thanks, Wyatt. It's delicious. I mean, it's great to be here.
So we have another Northlandia sequel. This one's a pure, true sequel. I feel like other ones have been kind of spin-offs of sorts. This is a true sequel. Previously, we visited Great Lakes Candy Kitchen with its bear trail up in Knife River. I believe that's episode 25 if you want to check that episode out before hopping into this one, or you want to go back to that one. At that time, we had said in that episode that we'd have to follow up with the trip to Canelake's Candies in Virginia, and now we have. So what is the relationship between these two businesses?
Yeah, these are two Northland candy stores that are owned and operated by members of the same candy-making family that's been active in the Northland since 1905, the Canelake family. So Great Lakes Candy Kitchen, which, as you mentioned, we previously visited, is run primarily by Patricia Canelake, her nephew Andy Matson. Andy is the son of Patricia's twin sister, Pamela, if you're still following this, who runs Canelake's Candies, which is the older store in Virginia. Well, I'll let Pamela Canelake explain.
This business has been in downtown Virginia since 1905, started by the four Canelake brothers, one which was my grandfather, Gus Canelake, and we are the oldest continuously operated candy store in Minnesota. So we are the third generation, and we also have a fourth generation working with us too. Sam Canelake is fourth. He's working here at Canelake's, and then my son Andrew Matson is in our other store in Knife River at Great Lakes Candy Kitchen.
So it's quite a history. This is one of many Northlandia stories where you could write a book if you had time, because it's a whole saga. Basically, Gus Canelake and his brothers founded Canelake's Candies, passed it down to Gus's son, Patricia and Pamela's dad. He actually sold Canelake's Candies because he thought he didn't want his kids to have to be in the family candy business. He wanted them to be able to do what they wished with their lives. So it went into the hands of another candy maker who took great care of it, by all accounts. But then after a while, it turned out that what his kids wanted to do with their life was make candy. So they bought the store back. So Canelake's Candies came back into the Canelake family. And by that point, they'd already founded Great Lakes Candy Kitchen, a new candy store at Knife River. So now the family owns and operates the two candy stores.
So this is a heartwarming family story, but just like with Great Lakes Candy Kitchen, that's not the main reason we decided to visit Canelake's this holiday season.
That's right. When we were at Great Lakes Candy Kitchen, I heard, we have this other family candy store, Canelake's Candies. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's very nice and all. And then I heard, they have some of the old figures from the Dayton's holiday displays, the animatronic ones. And I'm like, oh, really? This is starting to sound like a sequel. So we actually got to talk to both Pamela Canelake Matson and Patricia Canelake, the twin sisters, at Canelake's Candies when we visited recently. And we asked them how it came to be that Canelake's Candies owned multiple of these former Dayton's figures.
It was all started with Pamela's obsession with the Dayton figures. Did you search online?
I saw them.
Or
they just appeared on my Facebook page, and it was just little tiny pictures for an auction. They were actually quite blurry, and I was like, I want these. I wasn't sure why, but my dad originally had an animated little chef in the window, and it's not in today, but it's usually in year-round, but it's no longer working, and that was his pride and joy. So maybe that piqued my interest to begin with, subconsciously, and knowing that he liked that chef so much. But we saw these figures, and some of them were animated and some not. I immediately said, Patricia, do you want to buy these with me? She said, go for it.
So maybe just to summarize for those who aren't familiar with the Dayton figures, what are these figures exactly and where do they come from?
Yeah, so real quick 101 for people who don't know what we're talking about. These are figures that were featured in holiday displays at a department store in downtown Minneapolis between 1963 and 2016. For most of that time, it was the Dayton's department store, and then after some merging of chains, it became Macy's for the last several years. But for all of those decades, in different forms, one way or another, they would have this auditorium in their department store where they would feature displays of figures telling different holiday stories or scenarios. And in most of the cases, those figures were actually animated and would move. And the stories changed over the years. They actually, at their peak, had a lot of branded displays where they licensed stories like How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Babar and Father Christmas. They even had a Harry Potter display in 2000, which is wild. That's before the movies even came out.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and a lot of those figures were destroyed per agreement. You know, the owners of the rights to Harry Potter are not going to just let you keep all these Harry Potter animatronic figures around after your licensed display time is done. So a lot of those really branded figures were destroyed. But then there were a lot of figures for the last several years. The display was the same from year to year. It was called A Day in the Life of an Elf, Santa's Workshop, that sort of thing. So a lot of figures from that era, and then some surviving figures from earlier eras did survive and were ultimately sold at auction to a range of different buyers, among them the Canelake sisters.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that they had mentioned, when they bought these figures, we both had assumed that, they bought them for the store. But in fact, they bought them before they even rebought the business up there. So they bought them with no real sense of what exactly they're going to do with them, but they want them.
They're fans of the figures. And then once, they had window displays to fill, then the, next question is, well, how do we get these figures up and running?
So how did they get them up and running? Because surely they didn't do them on their own.
No. And it sounds like in a couple of cases, a couple of the surviving motors actually did work, but certainly the figures needed a lot of help, a lot of repair. So Patricia, who we know from Great Lakes Candy Kitchen, is a professional artist and created the bear trail out at Knife River. So she took care of the painting and sort of repainted the figures' faces, and the sisters worked together to kind of get them dressed back up and, outfit them for new stories. But to get the motors working, they turned to a man in Minnetrista, Minnesota. And this is a guy who, if you have any interest in what happened to the figures from the Dayton's holiday displays, you might already know about this guy. His name is Bill Ewald, and he has been in multiple news reports over the years since the Macy's display closed, because he ended up having what he believes is the largest private collection of figures, including some figures that go way back to the 60s. So he has a very impressive collection of Dayton's figures, and he knows how to fix the motors. So I called Bill to ask about his relationship with the Canelake family and the Matson family, and how he worked with them on these figures.
The reason Pamela got a hold of me was, we had some posts on our Facebook page, and she just reached out for some rehab work, just some, quick over the phone consulting on, some of the techniques on how to repair. And so we went back and forth for a good year on, she's a wonderful lady, went back and forth for about a year on repairing techniques and walking her through it. And then finally this year, or, midsummer, she reached out and said, can you reanimate a few characters for us? And I said, we'd certainly be willing to give it a try. So we took a trip up there and took some pieces home, got them reanimated with new motors, because her pieces were all missing motors. So we really had to kind of start from scratch on that. Her sister does the artwork, so I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to animate them. And then my wife did some of the alterations on the clothing. And so we brought these two pieces back up to them, and they were pretty excited about it. And then Pamela said, can we send you home with one more? And I said, sure.
So that all sounds like it's a lot of work, not only from, repairing the animatronics, making that working, but, repainting them. As you mentioned, Patricia repainted the faces. I believe Pamela also says she does the paper mache a little bit. I think she redid the head on some of the reindeer. And so there's a lot of work put into these. So the real question is, was it worth it?
Well, the Canelake and Matson families certainly seem to believe that it was worth the work. And Wyatt, you and I saw in customers' eyes when we were visiting how delighted they were by the figures that are on display, which is, just a handful of figures. There's a Santa. There's a figure opening a box of Canelake's chocolates. There's another figure sort of holding a Canelake sign that moves up and down. So it's nothing super fancy, but people are just enchanted by these displays. And we asked the Canelake sisters to talk about what customers' reaction has been. This is the voice of Pamela Canelake Matson.
They are really liking them this year. They're really liking the box. They say the candy box is their favorite, I think, with the opening and the closing of the box. But the kids are definitely looking at it, and the adults. And we saw one. They had a twilight parade this last weekend, and we saw one car pulled up to each window. It was nighttime, and looked at the display and then moved their car a little bit and looked at the next one. So it's definitely grabbing attention, and we're really happy about that.
So we've mostly talked now about, the figures and animatronics they have up and running right now. But let's talk briefly about what's underneath the surface in the basement of the candy store, which, as I understand it, you've actually already gotten to see once before. And they gave you a glimpse into the underbelly where there's still figures waiting for their second chance at life.
Yeah, I was just traveling through Virginia with my spouse, Dana, and we stopped in for some candy and actually had never met Pamela Canelake Matson before. I had only met her sister at the other candy store. So introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, and you're interested in the Dayton's figures." I'm like, "Oh, well, yes, I am." So she and her husband took me downstairs and showed me their bins of figures that are still down there waiting to be reassembled, reanimated. And they actually have a little no longer functioning animatronic, but one that dates from way back when their dad was running the store. He had this little chef that would be moving in the window. So that was kind of a cool part of the story too, is that this is really part of their dad's legacy in terms of creating attractive window displays for downtown Virginia.
Mm-hmm. And you can look at the photos and the video and the article for the column as well to get a glimpse for yourself. But there's something slightly kind of horrifying a little bit about seeing all these just kind of chucked into a bin. Maybe on their own, they're maybe just slightly creepy depending on, your own visual aesthetics and taste. But when they're just kind of thrown in a pile, it's a little, if you're walking around the dark space with a little light, and then you turn a corner and they're just right there, that'd be more than a little startling, in my opinion.
Yeah. And there's always something a little macabre about Christmas decorations in storage out of season. There's something, that's as merry as they are when you encounter them out in the open during the holiday season. When you encounter them out of season in storage, it's a little dark. There's something weirdly threatening about them.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be seeing it.
Mm-hmm. And some of them just waiting for their second chance at life to, well, they have options for the future for how they could expand their figure displays in the windows.
Yeah.
So for fans of the Dayton figures, where else can they go see pieces of this history?
Well, they don't have to go far. There are a number of both figures and other decorative elements from the Dayton's and Macy's displays that are incorporated into the display at Bentleyville. So if you go to Bentleyville, and you'll see little sort of dioramas with figures acting out holiday scenes, and they don't actually move, is my understanding at Bentleyville. They're just stationary, but you'll recognize these sort of little figures. I mean, those figures actually came from the Dayton's Macy displays. I emailed Nathan Bentley, who founded Bentleyville, and he said they actually got 3 truckloads of stuff from Macy's when it closed back in 2016. So they have got quite a bit of stuff. And he said, there's about a truckload on display, at any given year in Bentleyville, and they rotate it somewhat. So you can see some of those figures at Bentleyville. Bill Ewald has some on display at his house, and I'll let you do your own Googling there. I won't point you straight to his house, but it's if you're interested in finding these figures, it's a well-known site. They have some of the figures on display over the holiday season, and kind of cool that some of the figures are actually right back in downtown Minneapolis. Some of the figures passed into the hands of the Hennepin Theater Trust, which is the nonprofit organization that runs the historic theaters in downtown Minneapolis. And they have shared some of them with the Dayton's Project, which is the name for what is currently happening in the formerly known as Dayton space. It's not a department store. It's kind of like a big maker's market, which is something that certainly we in the Northland know and love. Well, this is the version in downtown Minneapolis, and they're trading on, obviously, the nostalgia that people have for the Dayton's name. And as part of their displays this year, they've taken some of those old figures and put them back on display in dioramas right back in downtown Minneapolis. And it was just sort of cool for me to realize that this is, again, continuing the tradition of retail displays and, little things that you do to make the holiday season magical. I liked what Patricia Canelake had to say about that.
When I lived in Minneapolis and St. Paul, I also enjoyed more the idea of people, is it called window shopping, or looking at the windows at Christmas? And I think the city of Virginia wants people to walk around and look in windows. And so different stores are taking the effort to really decorate. And I like the old-fashioned idea of people taking their holiday downtown walk and window shopping, looking at the animation.
So, Jay, the Dayton's displays were a Minneapolis phenomenon, but now some of these characters are up here in the Northland. So what to you makes this story Northlandia?
Well, besides the sheer quirky commitment that it takes to reanimate quote-unquote deceased animatronic figures, that's a, sort of a quintessentially Northland project to undertake. I love the fact that these figures are now spreading across the state. I was one of those kids who, I grew up, we lived for some time in the Twin Cities, sometimes in Duluth, but, it was a big deal. We would often go and see those Dayton's displays and then, the Macy's displays. And so I have fond memories. And, I know a lot of people of the Northland didn't make it down because, it's a big trip for some families to get down there, especially if you have, farm work or whatever to do. But a lot of families did get down and share these memories and sort of brought them back up with them to the Northland. And so it feels kind of fitting that the Macy's Dayton's displays, having been something cool that the whole state could be proud of, that now that they no longer exist in their old form, they've spread across the state. And I like the fact that you can see some of them in downtown Minneapolis, as should be the case, but also that some of them are on display in Duluth and some of them are on display in classic downtown storefront window form in Virginia, Minnesota on the Iron Range.
All right. Well, last question I have for you. Of the window displays that we saw there, which one spoke to you the most?
Oh, I mean, Santa, waving from his sleigh. That's just absolutely classic Christmas. In the fact that, as you were saying, Wyatt, one of the reindeer had a head that was reconstructed by Pamela Canelake Matson, and she ended up using driftwood for the antlers, not because that was her first choice, she explained. She actually had tried to have paper mache antlers first, and they proved a little heavy for the motor that makes the reindeer's head rock back and forth. But, the fact that it is driftwood, that's, there's something beautifully northern Minnesota about that. So yeah, I love seeing that Santa up there in the window.
Mm-hmm. I really like the elf that's opening and closing the candy box, and it sounds like that's a pretty popular one amongst visitors. I will add though, that one and others I'd say gets a little more creepy when you have the shots in my video that are more hyper close, zoomed in on the faces. I feel like they're meant to be taken in as a whole from a slightly removed distance. Once it's punched in, it's a little freaky. I know when I was in the office editing it, Matt Wellens next to me got a little spooked when he looked over and saw when I had the zoomed in shot on that particular figure. Even though I like that figure overall, but I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is a little creepy when it's punched in super close. But that's not how most people are taking in those displays.
Yeah. The other detail I like is that in the third display, the one that we haven't mentioned with the figure that's sort of lifting the Canelake sign up and down, there's sort of a little girl figure who's looking at him and just looks absolutely like delighted, right? And what the interpretation in that context is she's thinking, oh, Canelake's candies. I love Canelake's candies. This is so delightful. Merry Christmas. Hooray. Well, so the Canelake sisters believe that she was actually Wendy from the Peter Pan story. And so, presumably in her original incarnation, she would be meant to be just glorying at the magic of flying over London at night with Peter Pan. And so now she's glorying at candies on the Iron Range, both magic, right?
Mm-hmm. Different forms of magic, but all magic nonetheless. All right, Jay, well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for joining us again. Look forward to having you back here next week for another holiday-themed episode with maybe some familiar theming as well.
Thanks, Wyatt. Yeah, next week we'll be talking about another beloved holiday display, this one from Park Point in Duluth, and we follow its unexpected journeys across the city.
Well, we look forward to it, Jay. Thank you.
Thanks, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos and video produced by myself, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnew's.com. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.